Hi everybody, this is Dan Gordon, and I have Rick Bantelman here with me, one of our senior account engineers, and we're going to be working on the MyWorkDrive server just to kind of go through the basic setup, how to get it downloaded, and what the requirements are in getting it on server. How you doing today, Rick?
Good, thanks. How you doing, Dan?
Good. Looking forward to getting through this, and I know there's a lot of customers are anxious to see all the details on this. So the first step, of course, is to go to the MyWorkDrive website, or if you already have an account, sign in. There's a login button right here to sign in, and that'll take you to the user portal where you can check out pricing as well as download the server media. Otherwise, just go here and click on free trial and all the information. As soon as you fill this in, it'll take you right to the download page, and then you can download the server. Notice that we have support right on our website now too, and here is where you'll find all the articles relating to getting started and the server guides. And what I recommend is to at least just take a look at the getting started article, because that one provides the basics in terms of what are the prerequisites. So the way MyWorkDrive works is that you want to have it installed on a Windows 2012, 2016 server. In our experience, you want to have it fully patched because you don't want like Windows updates trying to be happening, slowing your server down while in the middle of running setup. Give it a good amount of RAM and a couple of virtual CPUs, and then we'll get into some of these other details here. These are some of the things further along. If you want to be able to have direct access to the server for the website, for your portal, for your users, there's instructions here on how to set that up. We also have the ability to make the server available using our proxy service, so you can kick the tires on it without having to go through all the setup of your own certificate and host name. But we do require Active Directory. You want to be installing it on a server that's a member of Active Directory. Ideally, it would be just a member server, not a domain controller, that will run for small businesses on a domain controller as long as it's fairly clean. There's a few caveats around some of the things like MapDrive and using current credentials to automatically log them in, but otherwise it will work fine on a server that's also a domain controller. But ideally, and for any company of any size, you're going to want to set up a separate server, because all we're doing is we're kind of just becoming that intermediary between your file shares and the internet. Everything stays on your file servers, and domain controllers and all the files stay over there. We're just sort of that intermediate server in between. Does that make sense, Rick?
It does, but I want to ask a question because I just heard it actually today. Someone wanted to know if they can set this up, and they said, do I have to go out and get the certificate and do that? And my response was, well, we recommend that because if you're going to our relay, you won't get the real appreciation of the true speed. And am I accurate in saying that it's better if you're going to do a trial to go ahead and get the certificate?
Well, if you're just going to be doing a trial to just sort of like look at the functionality, you can go ahead and use our relay services for that. You can even use that ongoing for like tiny, smaller businesses that just want to use the web interface to upload, download smaller documents and files and edit documents online. But any company of any size that has a good amount of data, when they do go into production, you're going to want to have your own SSL certificate. You're going to want to point to your own host name, because that way you're going to have a direct path coming in. But to just kick the tires, you can just use our relays for that, because then literally within, you'll see here in a few minutes, like within 20 minutes, we can have a server running and be playing around with it and kind of get a sense of the how it looks and how it works. Even the MapDrive, even though there'll be a message that'll pop up if you use the desktop client saying you really shouldn't do this, it'll allow you to do it. It's just going to be slower, of course, because you're hopping through multiple servers rather than just going directly into your box.
Good. I explained it not as eloquently, but I think I got the point. Okay.
Yeah. So, obviously we want a clean machine. We don't want to be installing it on something that has small business or Exchange, a bunch of other IIS websites or accounting software. But we do support ADFS and DFS. We've got some articles here and a couple extra steps you need to make for that. But then we're ready to go. So I've got a server here, and I'm logged on currently as a domain admin. I'm going to go ahead and just run setup here. So I've already downloaded the setup. So I'm logged on as a domain admin on the domain just to make sure I have all the privileges that I need on here. So I'm just going to go ahead and run the setup.
While you're waiting on that, I found it interesting. We got a call from a prospective customer doing a trial, and he called to say he did this in 19 minutes, and he felt that it was too easy, and what did he do wrong? And he didn't do anything wrong. So hopefully you can match his 19 minutes here.
Well, this is just a small virtual machine in our test environment. We'll see if we can make it under the gun here. Okay, so setup completed. We're just going to go into control panel. We're going to click this, and then we're going to go ahead and open the control panel. Notice I have Chrome installed. You can use Internet Explorer, but then of course you have to turn off all the security prompts, and then the screen size is kind of off, so you're not even seeing everything. So it's just easier to just use Chrome. So I'm going to log in. Notice it says username domain /administrator. It will default to your current domain. I'm logged on as a domain user, so I'm just going to go ahead and put in the username and the password for that, for this demo machine. And then since I haven't really set up anything on here yet, it's going to bring up this setup wizard. So this is just to really kind of help you get going, create one share, help you get it on the internet so you can kick the tires on it and take a look. So I'm just going to go ahead and create one share. I'm just going to call it share. In this case, you could put in server /share if that's what it is. In this case, I'm just going to have a local folder, which you can also do that. I think it's share 1. I can choose to import existing users and groups. So what this does is those are the people who are able to see this share. It is not giving them more permissions than they already have. They'll still need the NTFS permissions underneath. This is just who's allowed to see this share when they're accessing MyWorkDrive. So
and that's inherited from the actual share that was when it was created, correct?
Yeah.
Yep. Okay.
Yeah, so typically a business would have, like, let's say a finance share, and they would have, users that they want to allow, or groups that they would typically use groups. But just because you're able to access the finance share in the office using a traditional mapper doesn't mean you necessarily want everyone that's working in the finance department working remotely. So maybe you limit this further than what they would be allowed to do in the office. So that's kind of why we do that. We don't just assume everyone that you have access to in the office, you want to give them remote access. So that's why you're specifying this. But if you use a group, then you don't really have to ever come back here and set it again, which is nice. You just when a user is disabled in Active Directory, they're done. Because we use Active Directory, we don't have any separate databases or anything like that. So we're just using those natively. So whatever happens there, it just takes effect immediately in MyWorkDrive. So we got the one share. I'm going to go ahead and now we need to figure out how am I going to get to this. So it's basically what we have is we have an IIS web server that's running on here, and we need to decide how we're going to make this available. So we can go ahead and just put in QA server setup demo. And then I'm going to choose the data center closest to us, so then that'll pick what relay to run this through. So we're over here on the West Coast, and I'll just put an email address in here. And then I'll be notified when it's ready to go. It only takes a few minutes actually. So what will end up happening is I'll get an email, I'll be able to immediately start testing the client side of this at https qaserversetupdemo.myworkdrive.net. And I didn't have to open any firewall rules to do that or set up a certificate or any of that stuff. And I'll go through that here in a second on how actually that, if we did want to do that, where to go for that. But then just to kind of continue on and get through the wizard, in this case I want to allow Office 365 online editing. That'll allow users to be able to view and edit documents in Office 365 online. And then if I've got home drives I want to be displayed that are defined for users, I'll leave that on. If I want to limit file size, let's say I really don't want people using MyWorkDrive for anything but just standard Office type documents, maybe some small upload downloads. You can limit that if you want. Maybe you do want to allow some bigger stuff, but in this case, let's say I want to say, oh, just 30 megs, and after that they need to come into the office, or we'll give them some other mechanism for transferring large files, because maybe we don't have a super fast internet connection and we don't want them mucking that up or whatever. So once I do that and click finish, now it's configured, and I'll get an email here in a second. You'll see now that I have one share defined here. It's got the share name, the path. Again, that could be a network share, it can be DFS share, as long as delegation is set up, and then whatever users or groups I want to allow to be able to access that. So I can continue on and adding more shares. A lot of companies, what they'll do is they'll have kind of try to duplicate how they're using their map drives. They'll have like maybe finance, they have projects, and then they'll put it whatever groups. And so depending on whatever group you put here, it will determine whether or not they're able to see that when they log into MyWorkDrive. So let's just get under the hood here a little bit. So if I go to Windows Administrator Tools, you'll see that IIS got installed as part of setting this up. So if I go to IIS Manager, you'll see kind of under the hood what's going on here. So I've got some sites here. The one that matters in terms of being able to get to remotely is the web client site. So in this case, we've already got a binding here on port 80. We can go to that and do a little bit of testing. We also have port 8357, which needs to remain here. That's for the reverse proxy. If we wanted to add a new binding and put our own SSL certificate, here's where we would do that. So in this case, we would have that. We would install SSL certificate on our IIS server, and then we would select that, and then we'd have port 443. And then, of course, if we want people to be able to get to this box remotely, we got to remember that we could potentially have Windows firewall stuff that we need to deal with, just like any web server. So I would go here under Windows Firewall and make sure that that's open. So for example, I'm going to say, oh, okay, port 80, just like they have in the example there. I'm going to allow port 80, which will redirect. So if someone just types in the host name, from HTTP, it'll redirect them to HTTPS and go to 443. And that's how that would work. So it's just like I said, it's just like another website. If you were doing this on IIS on any web server, it would be the same kind of process. If you're going through a relay, you don't have to do any of this, but this is what you would do when you're ready to go to production and you want to have more speed. So if I actually now click on browse and just go to here just to see, here as you can see is this is actually what the client site looks like. If I log on, you can see, remember I set earlier 30 meg limit, you'll see that up here. I'm going to just log in just to see if I see that one share folder set up on there. Yeah, I do. I haven't put any files in there yet, but you can see everything is working. So at this point I just need to get it on the internet, right? So I will get that email in a minute here, and I can use that myworkdrive.net relay to be able to get to the site remotely. So let's just go through next kind of just some of the settings to kind of tweak things a little bit. So basically what do we have? Right now we have our site, we have it running, we have one share, the users in that group can log on. We should be getting, we probably already got an email saying go to https QA server setup demo.myworkdrive.net as a test site. We can start playing around even from the internet, or we can just do it locally like I showed here a second ago. And so we've got that enabled. You can see here licensed, we're running on a trial. Everybody gets 30 days by default for a new server. And we've got Office 365 editing enabled. We have the extra option of putting domain bindings in here, and what this is for is we have, you know, the ability to edit documents in Office mobile apps on Android and iPhones. So if we put a domain in the URL in here, then when users go there, if they just put their email address and password in, it will look that URL up for them, so they won't have to know your company, you know, MyWorkDrive site. So in this case, let's put it in there. Let's say our domain was, you know, QA setup.com. So if somebody puts an email address of, you know, Dan at QAsetup.com, it's automatically going to look them up, you know, this URL. So they won't need to know that when they're signing on to use that feature, which is really nice because then they're not bothering the help desk with that kind of information. So that's in there. So kind of continuing down here, we do require SSL, and what that'll do is it'll automatically redirect HTTP to HTTPS, which is why when you saw earlier I was opening up both ports, because from a user support perspective, you know, a lot of people forget to type in HTTPS with the S. So by just having that in there like that, becomes more user-friendly. Again, less help requests coming in. So if you've got port 80 there and 443 open, then anyone tries to connect to port 80, it just redirects them automatically to 443. That's typically how a lot of people do it, like on Outlook Web Access and stuff too. Just again, eliminating, you know, someone putting in a help request, I can't get to the website kind of stuff. And then just scrolling through here, map drive can be disabled, or if you don't want users using that, that's our desktop client. Same thing with mobile, that can also be disabled. We do support WebDAV as another way to connect to MyWorkDrive. There's some, you know, some really nice mobile apps, as well as maybe some third-party apps like maybe printers or copiers or something where you want to have them dump a scan into your server. Maybe you want to have it go through MyWorkDrive to be able to do that. But we don't need WebDAV enabled to use MyWorkDrive at all. You can completely disable WebDAV, and if you're in a kind of a secure environment, we recommend you do so, because it's then you'll be able to make sure we can do things like two-factor authentication and things like that. So you, in that case, you wouldn't want to have WebDAV enabled, since that doesn't support that. You can turn off or on the ability to share files externally on a global basis here by disabling OneDrive file sharing. Same thing with sharing files using Outlook Online in terms of sending attachments. Set your own limits in terms of attachment size. These all make sense, Rick?
Absolutely, yeah, and yeah, the explanation helps a lot too.
Okay.
So I was the enable WebDAV. I was not clear on until you just did that, because WebDAV, I'm thinking, is just, you know, drag and drop from your file system into MyWorkDrive. That's what I was thinking WebDAV was, but it's more than that.
Yeah, no, it's actually like a protocol, and done right, it's actually not a bad protocol, but unfortunately most of the vendors like Apple and Microsoft have not done a very good job on the client side, so it's kind of got a bad rap, but there are some really good front ends for it, and that's where the issue becomes. And then there's really no security model for like two-factor around that, so that's why.
Yeah, it almost seems like WebDAV, people try to use it as an API interface.
Yeah, kind of like it's an extension of HTTP as a way to kind of move files back and forth.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
Okay, so I'll just continue on. So we have the ability to do search, and by default that's using Windows search, and we have a separate article on that. But essentially the way that works is there's a, if you go to the server manager here, you'll see that if you click add roles to the server, that one of the roles that you can add is Windows Search Service. And so you would install that service on your server and then start actually searching those folders. And you do that on both the MyWorkDrive server, even though it may not have any shares on it, as well as any file servers that you have. And for installations up to like about a couple terabytes, you can just use the built-in Windows Search service. So if I go here and click through here, one of the features, if you scroll down in here, is the Windows Search service. So if I install that Windows Search service, then we can go back and we can search that folder and add that to Windows Search. And then within the MyWorkDrive interface, when we were looking at these shares over here, you'll see instead of saying disabled, it'll say enabled, assuming it's both the services that we just installed is installed on the MyWorkDrive server as well as any backend file servers. And then at that point, within this web interface, when I'm in here, you'll see a little search icon that'll show up here, and I can search for files by the name of the file, the name of the folder, or even contents within the files. So I think, yeah, we'll just let that, maybe we'll get back to that in a little bit. Okay, so kind of just continuing on through settings here. If we've got larger installations, we actually work with a company called DT Search, and that's one of the options here. And just contact support and we'll provide you an article on how to integrate that. But that typically you would have a separate server dedicated for search in your environment, and that points to all your shares. It does use the NTFS security underneath, so it won't display stuff people don't have the rights to, and so there's really no limit in terms of the amount of data that can be searched, whereas the Windows search service really can only really handle up to a couple of terabytes of data before it just doesn't function very well. There's some basic branding here. You can change your company name, the default language. We've already kind of set this up in the wizard, whether we want to show the home drive or the file sizes. We want to change those. For large organizations that maybe have a forest with multiple domains, there would be an option here to select what order you want to search when someone's logging in. If they're just putting on, let's say they just put in username, then in this case we can say, oh, okay, started looking in this domain, and if they're not in there, then go to that domain, you know. So typically that would be in a company with a lot of domains and a big forest. If we were doing any troubleshooting, we can change our logs here to debug logging and save that information. And then we'll be able to provide that to MyWorkDrive support if we're running into an issue that we want to troubleshoot. Session timeout, when we were on this page here, you notice we have public versus private computer. So this is just like Outlook Web Access. The default is to say that it's a public computer, which means that it will time out much faster. And so this is how many minutes. So, you know, maybe you're in a really, you know, maybe you want to, in a high security kind of company, you may want even just a few minutes before somebody walks away from the computer that, if they chose public computer, that it would time out and make, if somebody walked up there before they could get to anything, they would then have to log in again. Private computer, in this case, the person acknowledged that they're on a private computer, so this, you know, maybe then you might say, oh, okay, I'm gonna allow, you know, 8 hours or something like that. So that's customizable, and that's what will determine when you log on here how long it is before you have to re-authenticate if you're not doing anything in the browser. We have some timeouts here. If somebody put in some really big search that they're putting in, like, the letter A or something, and you have 1 million files on their server where you don't want to sit there chug along trying to find every document with the letter A, so we want to have some sort of timeout on there. And then same thing with if somebody was downloading a bunch of files within our web client, how much time do you want to allow before that times out? And that would really be dependent on how much horsepower you throw at the MyWorkDrive server in terms of processing that, how long that would be. But that's customizable as well. So, all these settings you see here are all included in the standard edition of the product. Let's just take a look back and see if this finished. It did. At this point now I can go to the control panel, and I should have some search options here. Indexing options, there we go. You can start that service. It would restart automatically on its own, but we'll just start it now.
So Dan, this is really giving the Windows, the web interface, the same capabilities as if you were on a map drive searching across the map drive, correct?
Well, it's actually better than that, because on a map drive, it's going to be searching the server kind of in real time, and it's going to be super slow. Mm-hmm. So you really couldn't search effectively that many files by trying to use a map drive. This actually has a little database. It keeps an index of all the files. Once we start the service and run it, and then set the indexing options here in the control panel and say, oh, okay, I want to search the E drive under share, and you would do this on any back-end servers as well. Then when they search, they're not just going to look for names of the files, but they can even find a word within a document. So it's a lot more robust than just like searching a map drive.
Oh, very good.
Yeah, and we're tying in this case directly into the Windows services that are native. Same way we do with Active Directory, same way we do with previous versions for versioning, which I want to get to next when we go through Enterprise. So anyway, that you configure that. We have a tech doc on how to configure all that for search. If we go to Enterprise, and we'll be able to see the settings available to us over there. So we have ADFS single sign-on. We have a support document on that. If you have an existing functioning ADFS environment set up for your domain, it's really easy just by putting in the host name, and we'll fill in the ADFS thumbprint for you and save. And then you actually even can require, if you want, people to use the single sign-on ADFS page. What a lot of companies do is there's a URL that you can pull from our help doc. You can make that URL available to users by just putting it on like the Office portal. Then when they click on MyWorkDrive, since they're already signed on in that case, it would just take them right in without prompting them for the second login. So true single sign-on is available. Yeah, and like I said, we have a support document on all that. So that's a really nice feature. Larger companies and organizations, universities are using that right now with MyWorkDrive. TwoFactor, we're partners with Duo on TwoFactor. And so there's instructions here to fill in this information. You create an account. You can actually do it up to 10 users for free, and that will work with MyWorkDrive as well. And you fill in the information here, and then when this is enabled, when users try to log in, they'll be prompted for a two-factor to send a text to their phone and put in a code, or call me, or a push to a Duo app, and it works really well. So then in addition to username and password, they also would have to prove who they are by having this extra device as well. Data loss prevention, I'm going to go ahead and enable that just so that I can show how that works. So data loss prevention basically right now is we're preventing people from doing downloads. So we can still show them the share, but when they go to download something, all those features are removed. So they can only view the files and edit them online, but they can't, there's no download button, there's no right mouse click for that. And they don't see those folder shares in like the map drive or the mobile client. They only see that in the browser client where we can control that behavior. So if you still want some users to be able to see files but not be able to download them for certain critical like confidential shares, you enable this. Typically you wouldn't disable downloads for all your shares. What you would do is put this feature on, then you would go to one specific share here. Now you'll see that there's an option here. I can do it for the whole share. So now in the case with this, now people can view and they can edit online if they have Office 365 enabled, but they can't download. But if I go like this, I could also do it by user or group too. So I can say, oh, well, administrators can download, but regular users cannot. So that's very flexible in that regard. You can do it by a user or group, by the whole share, or even globally all the way across all shares. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it brings up a question, and I don't know if you'll be getting into the actual user interface, where you can say, yeah, I want to use Outlook to send a file. Would that stop that attachment from happening as well?
Yeah, it will. So once that feature is enabled, and we have a separate video on our portal on YouTube channel that shows kind of how that works. But yeah, you're right. Not just download is removed, but if you right mouse click and go to share or click the share button, you'll see in share internally, which just creates a link to pass it around the office. People already have rights to that folder. It won't allow anything to happen remotely for anyone not internal. And there you'll see that the options for sharing using OneDrive externally or Outlook are just grayed out. They're not an option. Yeah.
Yep. I was hoping that was the answer.
Yeah. Yep. And we're going to continue to extend that even further with other types of documents too coming up on our roadmap. So we have some additional branding options that are available to enterprise companies where we can even change the initial login page. They can change the support page to their own support page. There's various parts within the web client where if they want to use a full map drive type of experience, there's a link for that. That can be customized here as well. And then even the colors, you know, this login page here, the bar at the top, all that can be custom. So like this bar here can be customized, that can be customized, the initial splash page, and they can put it back to default, of course, and then they can put their own logo on there, of course, as well. The other thing that we have available is logs, and logs are not, these are not just, you know, logs for errors, but they're logs around people logging on, uploading a file, downloading a file, reading a file, and this is, so it'll tell you exactly who deleted a file, who wrote to a file, who logged in when, and it's very flexible in terms of being able to search this. So if you're running into an issue or you're having to go through and do a regular audit, this can all be exported to a CSV file as well, and so then you can do more crunching around all that. So if anyone's ever tried to use Windows File Server or event logs to track user activity, you'll know that it's so chatty that it's really almost impossible to really do a good job of being able to figure out what was going on. We're really logging those specific events that you care about in terms of people being able to log on, log off, access denied, Dan deleted a file, created a file, modified a file, downloaded a file, that kind of stuff. Yeah, so the other thing that we can do is that we have the ability to do previous versions, and what that does is it's actually tying into the volume shadow copy service. So, essentially when you have server drives, like typically of course it wouldn't be C, but we would have things called previous versions. So if I go to configure shadow copy and I say I'm going to enable this, and maybe I go in and change the settings to say I'm going to make a snapshot of any changes that happen every hour, so this is customizable. You can schedule this, and so a lot of companies will do that, and so maybe they, every hour it'll make a snapshot, and so they have a little bit of space dedicated for keeping the difference in the bits of that. And so once that's enabled, then we can turn that feature on here in the MyWorkDrive server, and then if we go back to MyWorkDrive.com and go to support, you'll see that there's a page for that under support, and there's an agent that we download and install on our server. So if we go to the server guides here, you'll see that there's a special document just on how to set up previous versions, and then that links, it tells you, basically, basics of kind of what I just went over, enabling the feature for snapshots, download this agent, you put that on the MyWorkDrive server as well as any file servers, and then you'll see an interface like this that will then come up within the web interface. So on a particular file, you can right mouse click and go to previous versions, and you'll see ones, and you can restore those, and it'll restore a copy of that file with a date stamp appended to the name. So you of course wouldn't overwrite the existing file that's there, and you basically can roll back and get a prior version of the file.
Oh, very nice. Thanks.
Yeah, it's all tied right in. And at this point, we should have gotten our email here, I believe, on using, and we did. So at this point we have, you can see this is now public address. It's going through our relay. I can go to the site, I can log in just like I did locally here. There's no firewall rules to deal with, the SSL certificate, so I can go on here right now from any PC in the world, and I can start testing and taking a look at everything and make sure it's working before I invest more time into setting up all the host names and SSL certificates and firewall rules to make it publicly accessible directly.